For many listeners around the world, the voice of Robin Gibb was instantly recognizable. It carried a fragile tremble that sounded almost delicate, yet it held a powerful emotional weight. While the group Bee Gees became known for harmonies that defined an era, Robin's voice often carried the emotional center of their music. Fans heard sadness, longing, and honesty within his tone, even in songs that topped international charts. Behind the global fame, however, Robin lived with pressures few people understood. The success of the Bee Gees was enormous, but the personal cost was rarely discussed. His story is not only about music history, it is also about resilience, family bonds, and the emotional complexity that often hides behind celebrity success. To understand Robin Gibb fully, it helps to look beyond the disco lights and chart-topping hits and see the human being who carried the sound. Robin Gibb entered the world on December 22, 1949, on the Isle of Man, only minutes before his twin brother Maurice Gibb. The household they grew up in was filled with music from the beginning. Their father, Hugh Gibb, worked as a band leader and drummer, while their mother, Barbara Gibb, loved singing and encouraged creativity at home. Music was not treated as a distant dream. It was part of everyday life. Along with their older brother Barry Gibb, the boys began experimenting with melodies and lyrics while still very young. They would perform for neighbors, school events, and small gatherings, slowly building confidence. Even in those early years, Robin's voice stood out. It had a distinctive vibrato that carried emotion beyond his age. While Barry often led with strong presence and Morris handled musical structure, Robin seemed to sing from a deeper emotional place. The Gibb family eventually moved from England to Australia, a decision that would quietly shape the brothers' future. In Australia, the young musicians began performing more seriously. Television appearances, talent competitions, and local concerts became part of their routine. Audiences quickly noticed the unique harmony created by the three brothers. Each voice brought something different, but together they produced a sound that felt unusually rich and layered. Robin's contribution remained especially striking. His voice carried a slightly haunting quality that lingered with listeners. Even when he was still a teenager, people remembered his tone long after performances ended. Those years were also marked by intense practice. The brothers worked tirelessly on songwriting and harmonies, developing the discipline that later defined their professional success. By the time they considered returning to England to pursue music internationally, they were no longer simply talented teenagers. They were already dedicated craftsmen. When the brothers returned to Britain in the mid-1960s, the music industry was fiercely competitive. The cultural impact of the Beatles had transformed popular music, and countless new groups were trying to follow that path. At first, the Bee Gees were simply another young band searching for recognition. But their music sounded different from many others at the time. Their harmonies carried emotional depth rather than simple pop brightness. This difference caught the attention of Robert Stigwood, a manager who quickly recognized their potential. Stigwood believed their songwriting and vocal blend could reach international audiences. Under his guidance, the Bee Gees entered professional studios and began recording songs that would soon define their early career. For Robin, this period marked the beginning of worldwide recognition. His voice became one of the most distinctive elements of the group's emerging identity. The Bee Gees' early success came quickly after the release of New York mining disaster 1941. The song had a haunting atmosphere that immediately caught listeners' attention. Some radio audiences even believed it might be an unreleased recording by the Beatles, which only added to the intrigue surrounding the band. Soon after, songs like Massachusetts and I Started a Joke placed Robin's voice directly at the center of the group's identity. His delivery carried vulnerability and emotional storytelling that resonated with audiences around the world. Listeners did not just hear a melody, they felt a sense of confession in his singing. Yet while the public celebrated the Bee Gees' rise, the sudden fame introduced new pressures behind the scenes. Touring schedules, constant media attention, and expectations for continuous success created stress that the young musicians were still learning to manage. As the Bee Gees' popularity expanded, creative tensions slowly began to appear. In many ways, this was a natural challenge for a band made up of brothers with strong personalities and artistic ideas. Gibb increasingly became the primary songwriter and public spokesperson for the group. While Robin's voice remained widely praised, he sometimes felt his own creative instincts were not receiving the same attention. These feelings were rarely discussed publicly, but they quietly shaped the atmosphere within the band. For someone as emotionally sensitive as Robin, the imbalance became difficult to ignore. The Bee Gees were celebrated as a unified group, yet internally each member carried different expectations about their role. Over time, the pressure of fame combined with these creative disagreements began to strain the harmony that audiences admired. By the late 1960s, Robin reached a turning point. Feeling creatively restricted, he made the surprising decision to step away from the Bee Gees. For fans and industry observers, the move seemed shocking. The group had built enormous success together, and many people assumed the brothers were inseparable. For Robin, however, the decision was less about conflict and more about artistic identity. He wanted to prove that his voice and songwriting could stand independently. Soon after leaving the group, he released the song Saved by the Bell, which became a major hit in several countries. The success demonstrated that Robin's instincts were valid. His voice could indeed captivate audiences on its own. Yet despite the chart success, something felt missing. The emotional bond he shared with his brothers, especially Morris, had always been central to his creative life. Although Robin's solo career showed promise, the absence of the Bee Gees' unique harmony created a sense of emptiness. Music had always been a shared language within the Gibb family. Without that connection, the creative process felt different. Robin later admitted that the distance from his brothers carried a deeper emotional impact than he expected. The public narrative often portrayed him as difficult or overly sensitive, but the reality was more complicated. Leaving the group had been an attempt to find balance rather than to create division. Eventually, the brothers recognized that their musical chemistry was strongest together. Their reunion was not just a professional decision, it was a personal reconciliation that restored a sense of unity within the family. By the mid-1970s, the Bee Gees faced a new challenge, staying relevant in a rapidly changing music industry. Their earlier style, built on orchestral pop and ballads, was no longer dominating radio. The group decided to experiment with new rhythms and production styles while working in Miami. This shift introduced a more groove-driven sound that would later define the disco era. Songs like Jive Talkin' showed that the Bee Gees were capable of evolving. Barry's falsetto vocals became more prominent during this period, giving the group a new sonic identity. Robin adapted by focusing on emotional layers within the harmonies, helping maintain the depth that listeners associated with their music. The transformation set the stage for the most commercially successful period of their career. The Bee Gees' influence reached extraordinary heights with the release of music connected to the film Saturday Night Fever. The soundtrack became one of the best-selling albums of all time and helped define the global disco movement. Songs like How Deep Is Your Love and More Than a Woman blended rhythmic energy with emotional warmth. While Barry's falsetto dominated the spotlight, Robin's voice remained essential in shaping the harmonies that gave these songs lasting appeal. The Bee Gees were no longer just a successful band, they had become cultural icons. Yet the overwhelming success also created exhausting schedules and immense pressure. Behind the scenes, the brothers worked constantly, writing, recording, and producing music not only for themselves but for other artists as well. The popularity of disco music eventually created an unexpected backlash. By the early 1980s, public taste shifted dramatically, and disco was suddenly criticized by many critics and radio stations. Because the Bee Gees had become closely associated with the genre, they faced the consequences of that shift. Their music, once celebrated everywhere, began receiving less airplay. For Robin, who had always been sensitive to criticism, the change was emotionally difficult. The group continued making music, but the cultural enthusiasm that once surrounded them had faded. This period forced the brothers to rethink their identity and their relationship with fame. During these years, Robin's personal life also experienced significant changes. His first marriage eventually ended after years strained by touring schedules and professional pressures. Like many artists facing intense public scrutiny, Robin struggled with stress and periods of emotional exhaustion. At times, he relied on stimulants to maintain demanding work schedules, a pattern that was unfortunately common in the music industry during that era. Despite these difficulties, his relationship with Morris remained a powerful source of support. The bond between the twins went beyond music. It was emotional understanding that few others could fully grasp. In 2003, tragedy struck when Morris Gibb passed away following complications from intestinal surgery. For Robin, the loss was deeply personal. The twins had shared not only childhood memories, but also an almost instinctive musical connection. Without Morris, the Bee Gees could never truly exist in the same way. Robin often spoke about the profound silence left behind after his brother's death. It marked the beginning of a quieter period in his life, one filled with reflection about family, legacy, and the fragile nature of time. Years later, Robin himself faced serious health challenges. Doctors diagnosed him with colorectal cancer, a condition that gradually weakened his body despite aggressive treatment. Even during chemotherapy, he continued working on music, including a classical project created with his son. His determination reflected the same perfectionist spirit that had shaped his career from the beginning. For Robin, finishing creative work became a way of leaving something meaningful behind. Music had always been his way of communicating emotions that words alone could not express. When Robin Gibb passed away in 2012, the music world lost one of its most distinctive voices. His contributions to the Bee Gees helped shape multiple eras of popular music, from emotional ballads to disco anthems that still fill dance floors today. Yet his legacy extends beyond commercial success. Robin's voice carried honesty and vulnerability that made listeners feel understood. Even decades later, his recordings continue to resonate with new generations of fans. Looking back at his life, it becomes clear that the sound people remember was shaped not only by talent, but also by resilience, family bonds, and the emotional depth he brought to every note he sang.